Hello, everyone. This is an analysis of the latest GDP numbers that came out today. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reports GDP data basically the month after the quarter has ended. So the first quarter of 2016, January, February, March, ended um, March 31st. Roughly 1 month after that, you get what they call the advanced report of first quarter GDP. Now, the advanced report is the first attempt at measuring GDP, but not all of the data is in. So the advanced report has some estimates of the missing data. So 1 month from today will be another report. This is called the preliminary report, and it's going to fill in some of the data that is not available right now for first quarter GDP. Then a month after that, we'll have the final report, which will supposedly have all of the data for first quarter GDP. So basically, this is our first attempt. Now, again, let's do a little recap. GDP, let me get the right tool. I want the pen right here. So GDP, GDP equals C plus I plus G plus NX. Now, this is a measurement of all output right here, the value of all output. And these are the components of output. In other words, output made for households, output made for businesses, output made for the government, and output made for the foreign sector. Now, we know that output made for households, that's the biggest component of GDP. Roughly 68% of all output are for households. For businesses, it's roughly 15%. Government, roughly 20%. And since we run a trade deficit, this is going to be slightly negative. So you can see 68, that's 78, 83, that's 103%, right, with just these right here, right? So this must be a negative 3%. So let's clean this up. Now, what was the latest report? The latest report was that GDP increased at a very, 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 very modest 1.9%. That's now 1.9%. That's year on year. You may that's in other words, that's first quarter of this year divided by first quarter of last year. You may have heard of another uh, piece of information, 0.5% growth. Now that's a big difference, 1.9 and 0.5. Well, this right here is quarter to quarter annualized. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go over to Excel, and I downloaded the latest raw data. So here, what you see here you see quarterly data. See? Quarterly real GDP data. GDP in billions of chained $2009. This is real GDP right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bottom of the data, control down. Sorry. Okay. So here we see the latest data right here. Now, if I go over to here and I take the Q1 2006 and divide it by Q1 2016 divided by Q1 2015 minus 1, there's my 1.95%. That's almost 2% growth. But if I just take quarterly data, if I take Q1 divided by Q4 of last year. Now, before I subtract 1, let me see, let me get you to see this for a second. You can see my formula right there. If before I subtract 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put parentheses here. I'm going to annualize this. And I'm going to have you do this for the final exam, by the way. Before I subtract 1, I'm going to raise it to the 4th power. Then I'm just going to subtract 1. Now watch what happens. Boom. There's your 0.5%. So basically what that last calculation did was if the quarterly growth from Q4 2015 to Q1 2016, if that rate of growth continued for an entire year, the economy would only grow 0.5%. So basically this is a kind of a forecast. It's simply continuing the 1/4 rate of growth for 4 quarters. This is how much the economy has grown over an entire year. So let's go back to our report here. And you can see this graph right here. What you see here is you've got GDP data in blue, and you've got the inflation indicator, the GDP deflator, in gold here. So you can see that inflation is rather subdued. It's about 1%. You can see right here, is about 1%. So that's very modest for inflation. And you could see that the GDP growth here of this is quarter to quarter. So this is the 0.5% growth right here. Now let's scroll down. Let's look at growth on C, consumption. You can see growth here was very weak for the first quarter, under 1%, right? So consumption, which is the personal consumption, that's the C part of C plus I plus G plus NX, it's been relatively weak, and it's been kind of, we had this nice upward trend right here in the growth, but now we see this downward trend here. And that's one of the reasons why we have weakness in GDP, because it's the largest component of GDP. Let's scroll down a little bit. Net exports. You can see net exports, it's in negative territory. You can see here because we're running a trade deficit, and that trade deficit is getting bigger. One of the reasons is the strong dollar. The dollar is appreciating against other currencies, which is making US exports more expensive. Scroll down. Now this is the year-on-year GDP I was telling you about. Remember this data right here, this is the 1.95%, 1.95%. And you can see that this is relatively modest growth, and we're seeing a slowdown in growth in GDP here. Now hopefully this picks back up, but this is kind of indicative of worldwide growth. Worldwide growth has been very, very slow, and it may be surprising, this amount of growth right here is actually quite large when compared to Western Europe and Japan. So you can see this was a relatively weak quarter in GDP growth. Hopefully the economy is going to pick back up. This will definitely mean that the Federal Reserve will not raise interest rates because the economy doesn't need any cooling, and there's basically no inflation in the on the horizon. So the Federal Reserve has some grace period to start raising interest rates. They'll do that probably later in the year when GDP growth starts to pick up. That's it for now.